Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is Sunday, June 30th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. I know I missed our episode on Friday, so I wanted to catch up with you guys today on Sunday because there was a lot of news that took place over the weekend. Of course, primarily we're talking about the G20, and in particular, of course, we're going to discuss the trade negotiation, this trade quote-unquote truce that is now in place indefinitely between the United States and China. So we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to have a follow-up discussion to last week's podcast in relation to the Democratic Party's two debates. However, what I do want to focus on when it comes to the debates is Senator Kamala Harris in particular, because here at the Capital News, I was telling you guys a couple months ago, well before everybody was in the race, well before these debates, somebody to pay attention to is Senator Kamala Harris. I do not like this woman. I do not agree with 99% of what she says, but you have to be as objective as possible, and that's what I attempt to do here at the Capital News on this podcast. I attempt to look at things from as many different perspectives as possible so I can give you guys the best analysis possible that I can give you. And when I do that, I said, my goodness, looking at Senator Harris, she is going to be a formidable candidate. Why? Because I believe this woman is ruthless. I believe this woman is tough. I believe this woman is a fighter. I believe she is somebody who can debate and make an argument. She is a prosecutor. I believe this woman is power hungry. I can see that in her eyes. And most of the time, anybody who is power hungry, these are the people who are the least deserving of power. But nevertheless, this is the game in which we live. This is the environment. So Senator Harris, during the second day, the second night of the Democratic debates, she went to task on Joe Biden, not calling him a racist, making sure that she said she doesn't believe that he's a racist, but talking about some of his past remarks and this, that, and the other, talking about segregation and busing and this, that, and the other. I don't like to go down the rabbit hole on this crap. The whole discussion on racism it's quite disgusting to me. Anybody, any party who is obsessed with race, they're the racist. By definition, they're the ones that make the argument about race. And if you are making something about race, you are pretty much by definition a racist, because you are not basing your argument off of the character of an individual, their actions, their behaviors, this, that. You're just talking about the color of somebody's skin, and that's all it's about. We witnessed this for 8 years with President Barack Obama. You could not disagree with the man if you were having a debate or a discussion on the mainstream media. You couldn't do it, because if you disagreed with him, you were a racist. It had nothing to do with the fact that you don't believe in Obamacare, that the government should be mandating or managing health care. There's nothing to do with it. Doesn't mean it has nothing to do with the fact that you don't like tax increases. You want tax cuts. Doesn't matter. Barack Obama, an African American, end of story. You have to agree with him on everything. Can't go after him. That is racist by definition. But no, that's not how we have those conversations here in this country. I thought we were informed and told and taught by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that we're not supposed to look at somebody's skin color, that we're supposed to look and make determinations and judgments of people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Apparently, these Democrats haven't gotten the memo. So it is a disgusting display, because the two most vocal presidential contenders on the Democratic side are Senators Cory Booker, none other than I Am Spartacus, and Senator Kamala Harris. Now, we'll continue to monitor this. We'll see how long and how far they take this. I think this will backfire against them in a general election to go down this road. Hopefully they peel it back, they stop it for the sake of the country. Because does racism exist? I'm sure it does. to the extent that they make you believe that it does? Not even close. So I hope they pull back on this and start to talk about some real structural issues. I'm sure they have some personal stories about them. I'm not diminishing that in any way, shape, or form. Or they have loved ones or friends or relatives or constituents who have felt some sort of racism against them or discrimination. I'm not diminishing this. All I'm saying is the discussion needs to be elevated, because when these discussions are had, it gets dirty, it gets ugly, it gets nasty, it gets placed in the gutter very, very quickly, and we need to rise above that. But for scoring political points, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris are going to be all over this. And Kamala Harris is very ruthless, believe me when I tell you, and she's going to stick that knife in and she's going to twist it any way she wants to get her message across. So I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole on how she attacked Joe Biden, this, that, and the other. Of course, supporters of Joe Biden are not happy with Kamala Harris's attacks on Joe Biden, but most supporters of Joe Biden probably aren't happy individuals to begin with. Why and how they're supporting this guy is beyond me, but nevertheless, that's where we are. So we'll let them have their day in the sun supporting this guy. Crazy, sleepy Uncle Joe Biden ain't going anywhere, but we'll see how far he gets. Kamala Harris is going to clip him out at the knees, believe me when I tell you. But she has her own baggage, and we'll get through that as we make our way through this democratic process, through these presidential debates. We're going to have more and more dirt come out on all of these candidates. I'm telling you, folks, it's going to be a circus. It's going to be very interesting. It's going to give me so much to talk about. It's not even going to be funny. I'm going to have problems really condensing and keeping these podcasts to 30 minutes because of all the garbage that's going to come out. But it's going to be news, and it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be things that we're going to have to pay attention to, because these are individuals who could quite possibly become the next president of the United States. I'm still sticking with my guns at this juncture that President Donald Trump will win re-election because of the poor caliber, the low caliber of all of these Democrats. But if I should change my mind, I will, of course, let you know. Election day is a long ways away, and that is an eternity in this political environment. But Kamala Harris, I think, is going to be formidable. Donald Trump, I still believe, is going to win. That would be quite interesting, a matchup between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. I think Donald Trump could handle her, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But I do believe that Kamala Harris would be able to strike pretty aggressively and probably quite successfully, too, at the Donald. Most of that being the president's fault himself because of self-inflicted wounds. So you can just go in there, again, stick that knife in and twist. So we're going to have to see what transpires, but keep an eye on Senator Harris. The other thing I do have to applaud Senator Harris on is when she shut up Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, because I cannot stand the sound of that woman's voice. She was completely unprofessional, Senator Gillibrand was, during that debate, especially early on, until Senator Harris shut her up by saying, look, the American people don't want to watch a food fight. They want to know how we're going to put food on the table. Now, that was a decent line, and it shut Kirsten Gillibrand up, which I couldn't have been happier about, because this woman kept interjecting, interrupting, and I just can't stand her. She has terrible ideas. I don't know what she's talking about. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And that was just a good zinger from Senator Kamala Harris. Shut that woman up, thank goodness. And she really didn't do it for the remainder of the debate. And these two were standing next to each other, so I'm sure Senator Harris was not too happy with this, so she just shut her up, and I'm appreciative of that. The other thing I want to point out, and this has nothing to do whatsoever with any type of policy, but did you guys notice the two gentlemen from the state of Colorado, Governor Hickenlooper and Senator Bennett? Did you notice their common characteristic? They have the nastiest teeth I've ever seen in my life. They're both nasty, sewer yellow. I don't know if this is from smoking marijuana because it's legalized over there, if this is some of the marijuana seeds that are getting in their teeth, discoloring them. I don't know if they're eating yellow-colored snow, which is disgusting. I don't know what's going on in the state of Colorado. I've never been there. I'd like to go, but if everybody got teeth like that, I'm going to stay here in Pennsylvania. we'll see what happens. But those two gentlemen, I really don't want to see them talking anymore because I'm going to have to see their teeth. So hopefully they don't make it too far. But that's just a side note. Pay attention because I know something ain't right there. Now, moving across more to the geopolitical news that took place this weekend is the conclusion of the G20 meeting that took place in Osaka, Japan. And primarily we're concerned here with the meeting that took place between President Trump and President Xi. Now, this meeting was about an hour long, which was shorter than the 2.5 hour long meeting that these two gentlemen partook in back in Argentina at that G20 meeting back in, when was that, December already, so 7 months ago. But where are we now? We supposedly have a trade truce. It's indefinite this time. There is no deadline. Last time, when these two leaders met at the G20 in Argentina in December, they said there's going to be a 90-day period, and then there's going to be that deadline. Remember that? 90 days, boom, excuse me, something's going to happen. So that took us to March. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. So there was an escalation. We're going to slap these trade tariffs on you, and that's what we're going to do. We did it. Chinese responded in kind, and that's where we've been until these trade talks collapsed at the beginning of May. Now, we were told repeatedly during that 90-day period and up until the collapse in May that everything was going swimmingly well, that we're in the final lap, that there's going to be a signing ceremony in Mar-a-Lago, Florida, the president's resort, his residence. Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be fantastic. Meanwhile, not so, Joe. Not so. So what happened? We talked about this last week because we had some reports that were circulating out there in the media about what the Chinese were going to be looking for, what they were going to be demanding to continue with these trade talks. Well, we talked about a few of the bullet points. As a refresher, Huawei, remember the technology firm, Huawei Technologies, that ban needs to be removed. Secondly, punitive tariffs need to be removed. Thirdly, the U.S. needs to remove the demand that China needs and or has to buy more U.S. products. Now, of these 3 points, when you look at them, you say, okay, well, some of those things make sense. You would expect the Chinese to want to say those things. However, when you look at it from the perspective of the United States and when you look at it from the perspective as to what the actual job and duty is of the President of the United States, it has to do with the protection of the United States of America. So of these 3 points, the one that has to deal with national security issues is bullet point number 1. And from the Chinese perspective, they're saying that Huawei Technologies, the ban that the United States has placed on Huawei, needs to be removed. Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the one that the president conceded on. Now, you have our pal and buddy Larry Kudlow out there saying, look, this isn't an entire concession here. We're not giving away everything to Huawei. We're not going to allow U.S. companies to sell everything that Huawei wants. What we are going to allow to take place now, instead of this being a full ban on everything, Huawei will be able to trade with U.S. companies on items that are very common, meaning they can buy these things anywhere. But if it's something very specific, something that could give them a leg up, something that could potentially allow them to spy or extract information from U.S. companies or to reverse engineer certain products, no, those things are still going to be banned. That's what they say. We'll see what happens. But that's sort of the damage control, if you will, that's coming out from the White House. And, of course, this is, again, coming from Larry Kudlow, the president's pretty much his main guy for economic analysis, being his economic advisor. So this to me, the other points that were made here, punitive tariffs need to be removed. Okay, I mean, President Trump's the tariff man. Okay, I'm not advocating that he remove them. Not for a second. The third point, that the U.S. needs to remove the demand that China has to buy more goods from the United States. This has nothing to do with the president's powers, if you will. This is not his first priority. This is not his obligation as the president of the United States, as the commander-in-chief, to protect U.S. interests, to protect our borders, to protect our sovereignty, and to protect us from national security issues. Well, placing tariffs on China isn't a national security issue. Whether or not the Chinese buy more soybeans isn't a national security issue. But what we have been told by the Trump administration and from members of Congress on both sides of the political aisle is that Huawei presents a national security threat. That's what we've been told. Now, we would like to believe the president and our government, but we know that that's not a safe bet. And this is not an attack on Donald Trump per se. This is the government at large. We shouldn't have been trusting Obama. We shouldn't have been trusting Bush. We shouldn't have been trusting Clinton. This is par for the course. So I am not singling out President Trump by any stretch of the imagination. He just happens to be the guy right now. He's the president. But when you have the government come out and say Huawei is a national security threat, and now all of a sudden you're going to make some concessions on this, of any of the 3 points, that's the one he should not have backed down from. But he did. The president is also not going to institute more tariffs. That's part of this truce. So Huawei is going to be able to procure parts, according to Larry Kudlow, very common parts from U.S. companies. This is also at the request of U.S. companies who have been placing a lot of pressure on President Trump, saying, "Oh, no, you can't do this. Huawei is one of the largest companies in the world. No, Mr. President, no, this is a huge customer of ours. We can't do this. You got to make some concessions." Well, he did. He made some concessions because some American companies complained, and he did. I don't know if you guys heard this either, but Apple, their Mac Pro, which is actually manufactured here in the United States, is going to be leaving the United States. And guess where that's going, folks? To China. Apple is moving their production of their Mac Pro from the United States over to China. Now, of course, the way that they are sort of doing, I don't even know if you would call it damage control, because I just frankly don't think that they care. They're just saying, look, a lot of the other things that are, that are Apple, that have to do with the Mac Pro, it's designed in the United States. We have our engineers here. We have our designers here. A whole bunch of other things are sourced from the United States. They're designed in the United States. But some of the process is just better for the company if it gets shipped over to China. Yeah, no problem. No problem whatsoever. Where's the president on this one? No problem. Doesn't make any sense to me. This is what you have right now. The president could have removed some of the punitive tariffs. Has nothing to do with national security. It just would have made him less of a tariff man. Remove the demand that China buy more goods from the United States. So that's a political promise that he's going to be looking out for the farmers and ranchers, primarily. Okay, I get that. That's a political scoring point. But that has nothing to do with it. That has nothing to do with your priority as the president of the United States. We'll see what happens. I do not want this trade war to escalate. So I'm glad it has not. I'm glad there's a truce. But there's no timeline. There's no deadline. The president is now talking about, well, I'm in no rush. I'm in no hurry. I want the right deal. I want quality now, not speed. Before, it was 90 days. You got 3 months. And we were told at the end of that, we were going to have a signing ceremony. Didn't happen. So, something's amiss here. You also have President Trump coming out, par for the course, saying everything's fine. Everything went better than even expected. And what do the Chinese say on the other side of this now? They're saying there's a long road ahead. A long road ahead. So you got President Trump on one side saying that the deal, the negotiation, the meeting was better than expected. And now you have the Chinese starting to talk. And now they're coming out and saying there's a long road ahead. This is exactly what I have been stating here on the Capital News podcast for the past couple weeks, folks. This has to go back to the letter that I wrote to the president, that I read on this podcast, talking about the president's credibility. I stressed this point last week. What happens if we come to a juncture where you have President Trump saying everything is fantastic, everything is better than what we thought. And then on the other side, you have the Chinese coming out and making statements. We got a long road ahead. Who will the markets believe? Will they believe the leader of the free world, the President of the United States? Or are they going to believe a bunch of communists in China, state-run economy? Because if it's the latter, we're in a lot of trouble. And that is exactly what just took place. Now, it wasn't very strong rhetoric from the Chinese at this point, but they said, no, there's a long road ahead. Long road ahead. So we don't anticipate this thing coming to a conclusion anytime soon. I don't anticipate any real resolution to this at all, to be quite frank with you guys, because a lot of the points that the United States, the case that the United States is making against China, particularly with IP theft, forced technological transfers, the things we talk about here all the time, the Chinese don't acknowledge that they do that. The Chinese don't acknowledge that they're stealing anything, that they're engaged in cyber warfare, that they're engaged in corporate espionage. They don't admit it. So what are they going to agree to? It's a basic question. Now, one of the other things where I think the president made a mistake going pretty much against China on his own, meaning he didn't get a bunch of our allies. He didn't get the European Union on board. He didn't get some Latin American countries on board. He didn't get Mexico and Canada on board. He just went it alone. And the reason is because, well, he's going after Canada and Mexico. The reason is he's set to go after the European Union here shortly. Remember, folks, it was just a couple months ago, maybe not even, where he postponed going after the European Union because China right now is front and center. So he said, yeah, I'll delay putting on some other tariffs on some autos, the automobiles coming into this country and auto parts and all that stuff from the Eurozone and from Japan. He just kicked that can down the road for a few more months. So when is he going to bring that full circle? So even if he did bring some of our economic allies with him on this mission to go after the Chinese, he would have been attacking our allies eventually too. So that makes it very difficult, because I think if he had, let's just call it what he likes to call these maximum pressure, that would have been a form of maximum pressure against the Chinese, because he would have had the world's largest economies against China, saying, look, we've been helping you guys grow. We're huge markets for each other. Everybody will be better off if we have something that's more akin to true free trade and open markets and transparency. And guess what? Now you have to deal not only with the United States, but you got to contend with the Canadians, you got to contend against the Mexicans, you got to contend against the European Union. That would have been very formidable, very difficult for the Chinese to overcome that one. Now you just want to go man-to-man, hand-to-hand combat between Trump and Xi. This makes it very interesting for a rising economic and military power in China. This is their moment. This is President Xi's moment to step up and say, yeah, I'm in no hurry either. You're in no hurry, I'm in no hurry. We can print money, we can cut taxes, we can do debt forgiveness, we can do whatever we want. We're a bunch of communists over here. But you have to deal with a whole bunch of Democrats and Republicans and a whole bunch of people that don't like you. And you have checks and powers. It's a completely different system, completely different story. And the United States even continues to have companies, major companies, and Apple, for example, that is going to continue to send their production to China in the course of all of this. So if Trump wanted to go at it alone, one of the best things that he could have done, and I don't know if he could have pulled this off, I don't know if anybody could have pulled this off, but what he could have done, or at least attempted, was to get a lot of these business leaders in a room, Apple for example, and say, look, you guys, I understand the whole profit motive. I understand the whole manufacturing thing. I get it. But where is your loyalty? Where is your patriotism to the United States of America? Where is it? And if he had convinced them on that point and a handful of others, then maybe, just maybe, with that type of pressure, he could have had major U.S. corporations who have major manufacturing and other supply chain logistics taking place over in China. He could have said, we're going to move. Maybe not necessarily come back to the United States, but we're leaving China. You put that type of pressure on them, maybe you really get them to the table. These tariffs, okay, well, I mean, we can go back and forth, and we have here on multiple occasions whether or not they're effective, whether or not they're the right thing to do, whether or not it actually brought the Chinese to the table. Again, we can go back and forth on this. But China isn't paying the tariffs. American consumers are. You are. I am. American businesses are. How much of that they pass on to us, the consumer, is the question. So we are nowhere closer to having this thing resolved whatsoever. There is still a huge amount of uncertainty that is going to remain. Because now we know both sides are in no hurry. Trump says it on multiple occasions. And now why would President Xi be in a hurry? He got one of his concessions. The U.S. is allowed to sell to Huawei. There's still some tariffs. But the Chinese ain't paying them. President Xi knows this. Now, could there be some downstream effects that are affecting them on the demand side of things? Sure. And we're going to talk about that on the economic podcast today because we have some more numbers coming out, and they're not pretty. From China, from Japan, from South Korea. I mean, it's just continuing. So the question now is, how are the markets going to respond? Because they didn't respond too well last year after the other trade truce between U.S. and China. They had a short little stimulative effect, but then you had the end of the year. You had December. So I might be mistaken. I'm going to have to check my dates. I think I might have said December was when the G20 was. I think it might have been earlier than that. It might have been in October when they were in Argentina. But nevertheless, this is sort of the same song and dance. Will the markets behave in the same way? That remains to be seen. Because I think a lot of this was probably priced in because the markets were anticipating a truce. This is a truce. How long is anybody's guess? Because now we're in no rush. China may very well be happy with the fact that there's no rush now. It's going to be interesting to see what type of trade schedule transpires from all of this. Meaning, how often will the United States travel to Beijing? How often will the trade delegation from Beijing come to Washington, D.C.? Because we had a lot of back and forth there for that first, 90-day period. And now we've been on almost a 2-month hiatus. Will they get right back to it? Because now, if you have the Chinese starting to speak up, will the White House continue to speak up and say everything's going fine? Because if they're going to come out and say everything's going fine, and then the Chinese are going to come out and start saying, we're not in any hurry. We can't agree to this. Who are the markets going to believe? Because if the markets believe the Chinese over the United States of America, we have a big problem. And I'm going to say this repeatedly because this is very important. It is something that needs to be stressed. This is why the credibility of the President of the United States is paramount. This is why you can't... I appreciate the positivity from the President. I appreciate that he is a cheerleader for the United States. I honestly do. But there is a point where you have to be careful with what you say because words do have significance. There is importance behind them. And when you cause a lot of uncertainty, you start to cause a lot of economic problems. And that is what we're going to talk about on our economic podcast. So be sure to join us on episode 89B. Thank you so much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. This conversation is far from over, so stay tuned. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.